Okay, hello everyone. This is our last module in the short course on risk assessment, just wrapping everything up. So the learning objectives for the course, to recap, was to understand what risk means, to understand how risk is estimated and recognize the steps of a risk assessment, and then understand what kind of data sources are used in a risk assessment. So hopefully that's what you've got from this course. Let's go through each of the modules in terms of learning objectives and review those. It might be a few days since you've watched all these. So the learning objectives by module. In module 2, we talked about the definition of risk being the likelihood and severity of harm. We also talked about the application of this term in the area of food safety. In module 3, we talked about top-down and bottom-up methods, and then talked about what kind of output a risk assessment can produce. In step 4, we talked about understanding the step of hazard identification in risk assessment. So knowing that all foodborne pathogens are not known right now, and hazard identification is the step in which you're deciding which pathogens you're going to focus on, which hazards you're going to focus on. Module 5, we talked about exposure assessment, which is understanding how information on the amount of hazard in a food is used in an exposure assessment, and what type of data is required for doing that part of an exposure assessment. And then module 6 was about the consumption side of the exposure assessment, how information on the food that people consume is used, and then what type of data that is, and then understanding how to put this all together, the information on the contamination of the food with the information on consumption. How do you put that all together to estimate exposure? Finally, in module 7, we looked at a hazard characterization, which is the dose response function, understanding how much of a dose produces a response in terms of potential negative health outcomes. And then also we talked a lot about the sources of the data on dose response and how the limitations of those different studies in terms of estimating these impacts. And then finally, module 8, we talked about the risk characterization, which is when you put it all together, and we gave some examples of output from a risk assessment to give you a flavor of the kinds of questions you might be able to answer using these risk assessment tools. So I hope that you all are walking away with a bit better understanding of risk assessment and how it's relevant to your work. There were some advanced readings that were provided on the website if you're interested in digging deeper into some of these topics. There's a lot of material out there on risk assessment in general and food safety risk assessment in particular. Lots of great examples that I hope you'll discover as you continue your learning about this topic. So thank you again for joining this course, and I look forward to seeing you in the other courses.